Okay, welcome back. Today we're going to look at the second part of cognition. We're looking into language and thought, and this is the second part of the notes over language and thought, about how language influences thought, how the process of language and communication in that way also changes how you think. And we're also going to look in this section about the development of language, especially with children. So we'll look at a couple interesting little signs on here. Signs are fun. Frog parking only. All others will be towed. Get it? See, that's a good one. I like that. Yeah, nice work. Please do not put heavy item on the copy machine. Thank you for your copulation. Yeah, don't do that either. And elderly people, and there's a sign kind of pointing towards cemetery. A little unfortunate there. And of course, you know this one already. I don't even know what's wrong with the sign, really. Christ died for our Dunkin' Donuts. I'm pretty sure that says sins behind there, maybe. But maybe it's not. Maybe they really did die. In a way, he probably did die for our Dunkin' Donuts. It's a different way of looking at the world. God hates ponies. I was promised donuts. See, maybe you were promised. See, God hates ponies, but he died for your Dunkin' Donuts. So I don't know. I don't plan this stuff. It just happens. Close corporate tax loopholes. Tax religious groups. End the wars. Legalize weed. And bring back arrested development. These are things that people write on signs to communicate ideas that are going through their heads. And I'm not sure what's going through her head. Maybe it's some weed as well. So I'm not positive. Syntax is the rules that refer to the way we order words to create meaning. Your new please put away I can't even read it right. Your new please away shoes put. This makes us confused, and I'm exhibit A. Whereas please put away your new shoes is quite clear. It's so clear that as soon as I read that, I can see it. But I couldn't read the top one correctly because I'm so used to using these rules of syntax to form what I have to say. How do we learn language? Well, behaviorists look at the exposure we have to the environment, which reinforces, and the repetition that we see helps us to understand how we learn language. A nativist would argue that we're hardwired to learn language and that humans are unique in that respect, and other animals or mammals in the planet would not be able to do that. So both sides have supporters, and there isn't really super clear evidence over which side might be correct here. I think there is some evidence to state that maybe they're both correct. So it's just a difficult question to come to grips with. Maybe it's like a lot of things in psychology. There's a theory, and there's a third theory that combines the first two theories, and we think that comes closer than either one. But your constant grammatical errors makes me want to burn down whatever school you attended. That's a pretty good one. Don't let worries kill you. Let the church help. So, is it that you want the church to help you die, or do you want the church to help you kill yourself? Well, I hope not. So fun that they won't even know they're learning. Of course, what's wrong with that? Oh yeah, maybe the THEIR. So an English teacher wouldn't appreciate or like that very much at all, would they? This is a man who was president of the United States for 8 years, and sometimes he had a little bit of trouble with words. I'm going to play a little bit of this for you just because it's so much fun. This is his "Fool Me Once," and this is real quick. You may never have seen this. One reason I'm going to play it for you, but it's always kind of fun to check in with George W. Bush, not H.W. H.W. was his dad, president for 4 years. But here's the little clip. I'll show it to you.
There's an old saying in Tennessee, I know it's in Texas, probably in Tennessee, that says, "Fool me once, shame on you. If fool me, we can't get fooled again."
I always think of the famous Who song, "Can't Get Fooled Again," and that always plays in my mind when he's speaking. I have a few different video clips of him. You can search YouTube and find them, but presidents, we usually consider that they're someone who's going to be very, very good at communication, And the current president at this moment is President Barack Obama, who you would think would be very skilled at communication. He seemed to show that on the campaign trail. But he's so darn sure of his words and so careful. It's like he's almost gone too far in the opposite direction of someone who didn't really weigh his words very much. I mean, say what you want about their politics or whatever. You can like them or hate either one of them. I don't really care. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the way that they communicate thought through their use of language. Bush stumbled, and Barack Obama seems so concerned about stumbling that he never just says what's on his mind and just speaks freely. Sometimes that can aggravate me too. It's like, spit it out already, Obama. He just seems to sometimes that's pretty boring to listen to. How is this deceptive? These are two restrooms. One has a sign that clearly says men. The other one has a sign that clearly says ladies. And there's even a picture of a man and a picture of a lady. But what does it really say? It says, but don't go in there, men. This is the ladies' room. The men's room is across the hall. There's plenty of information on there to tell you which one to go into. And the other one says, but don't, unless you are, don't go in here, ladies. This is the men's room. The ladies' room is across the hall. So you can imagine that most people are going to look very quickly at men's and ladies and go in the wrong one. I'm not sure this is a good idea for your restaurant because people might kind of get upset about this. I think there's a restaurant in the area. It might be over here in Humble, Papacitas, if I'm not mistaken. I have to look the next time I'm in there. They have a sign on the back of their men's room door that says women's room. So as you're leaving it, you know you've made the right decision. You've gone in there and you've done your business and you're leaving. As you're leaving, you look up at the door and it says ladies' room. So you start to freak out immediately, like, oh my gosh, I think I went in the wrong one. And as you walk out, you realize that's just, they put the sign on there to freak you out. I'm almost certain that was on there at some point. If it's not that, I've seen it somewhere. But here's a sign of really fun, awesome, stupid people. But Americans, help us boycott Mexico. Respect our ARE country. Speak English. Make English America's official. Of course, they spelled that wrong language. Get a brain, morons. Oh, brother. You just gotta love it. Some people are very, they have a lot of passion, but maybe they don't have quite as much skill in communication as they should. Chomsky, Noam Chomsky, is somebody who did have some skill in communication. He discussed the acquisition of language, and he is someone who was sort of the father of linguistics. And Pinker mentions him often because really he has inspired the works of Steven Pinker and others to help him. The father of modern linguistics is Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky believed that language is learned by exposure to language, but the ability to speak is a hardwired function, and he believed in this area of the brain somewhere that must be a language box. It's a specific location focused on harnessing your brain's ability to be able to communicate with the spoken word. If we do not learn language well during a certain time period, an early critical time period, then we will not learn language well. And this was some of what Chomsky wrote about in his book on language, which were Language and Responsibility, Reflections on Language. Those were his two really classic works. Now, he has written tons of other books, mostly political books about participation in politics and that sort of thing. He's pretty influential in that area. But there is overwhelming evidence to support the theory that he's mentioning here, that the ability to speak is hardwired. Lenenberg is another person who, in 1967, spoke of a critical period hypothesis. If language is not learned before an early age, estimated about 4 to 6 years of age, a child's ability to learn any language at all becomes greatly compromised, or it disappears completely and altogether. And this research has been advocated for and debated against by these linguist giants and linguistic giants like Chomsky and Pinker. And the evidence from Lenenberg and others is going to draw extensively, and did draw extensively, on the widely divergent examples of feral children. And you see some examples of them there. One, a more modern feral child at the top, and she would bark like a dog. She was kind of raised with dogs and mistreated by the people who were looking after her. They put her in dog kennels, and she would crawl around, and she was raised with the dogs, so I guess she figured she was a dog, which is very strange behavior. And then there's the wild child of France, or Avignon, at the bottom. Somebody we'll look at when we look into development. Just going back to that for a second, both of these cases, the person was unable to learn language because when they were kind of rescued from these situations, actually the wild child of Avignon, he just appeared one day in a town. He had been captured and kept, and then he disappeared and ran back into the woods, which tells you, I guess, all you need to know about society. He liked the woods better. But he did show up back in town one day, and a guy took him in and tried to work with him to learn language, even gave him, everything you could imagine to help him along this road. He's going to teach him how to do it, and he couldn't. And so this critical area or critical time period hypothesis makes some sense. Chomsky wrote that language is a process of free creation. Its laws and principles are fixed, but the manner in which the principles of generation are used is free and infinitely varied. Even the interpretation and use of words involves a process of free creation. And this is something that he found fascinating about language, that there was this very creative process with it. Chomsky's inborn universal grammar kind of worked this way. He said, we acquire language too quickly for it to be learned. It is something that young children are able to do very fast. So there must be this learning box or learning area of the brain inside of our heads that give us and enable us to learn any human language pretty fast and pretty capably. There is some evidence for this, as you saw in the previous slide, but there's some evidence in just watching children learn. These are his offices there. You can read that at the bottom if you want, but at MIT they have this building that looks like it's collapsing. It's kind of an artwork in itself, and it's supposed to give the appearance that it's a metaphor for freedom and daring and creativity of the research that's supposedly going on inside. And I do believe that it kind of fits Chomsky for sure. He was quite a daring researcher and still remains somebody with lots to say on the world in all kinds of various different disciplines. Let's talk milestones in language acquisition. As a child, where should you be at typically in learning language and being able to express language? At 2 months, there's the cooing type thing that kids do. At 2 to 12 months, you'll hear the babbling, blah, 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 babble, like goo goo, ga 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 ga, da 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 da, all that sort of stuff. And they sort of like seem like they're imitating the people around them. At approximately 12 months, you'll get the first word, usually da, which dads all over the world are like, yeah, dad, that's me, he's calling me. But in reality, it's just the easiest thing for a little kid to form is da. It's easier to say, I guess. At approximately 16 months or so, they'll start to do their 2-word utterances or more of a telegraphic speech. 2 to 6 years, they're going to add about 6 to 10 new words a day. And they'll learn grammar, but they'll do the overextensions. Doggies, for example, for 4-legged animals. And it could be any animal. There's a cat, there's doggy, 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 and they'll just say doggy 100 times. But at age 5, you'll get the overregulation, or overregularization, sorry. I goed to the store. And you'll see that quite often around age 5. But from 5 on, they start to add words to their vocabulary, and they learn the subtleties of language. And they do this pretty fast. And even my own son, it was amazing to see how quickly, from age 5 on, he was able to keep adding words. And other languages show the same type of pattern of acquisition, not just English. Good night. Have a good sleep.
Right.
So let's imagine this scenario. We've got a 40-year-old couple who emigrate from Italy to the United States. They have 2 daughters. One's 15 and the other is 7. Based on research that has investigated the mastery of English as a second language, which family member would master English first? Well, we've got some pictures here at the bottom, and I'll just tell you this right away, that the picture on the left, top left, is of my friend Chris Antonelli and his wife, Virginia, and his 2 daughters, which are roughly about that age. He's not from Italy, but his great-great-grandparents were. But you can imagine what that would be like if, he was coming over. So I use that as an example. You've got the great United States there and all of our great flags, the Lone Star flag. I think it's the best one. I'm not even, a native Texan. I got here as fast as I could, but I do think the Lone Star State's flag is pretty spectacular. I do like California Republic too. Looks pretty sweet with the bear on it and the 1 star. But in Italy, you get these pizzas on the street corner. They're like little personal pizzas, just like that. And I've never been there, but I've had students who've gone there and they report that, you're walking around and you're in Rome or whatever, and there's a little restaurant on the side of the street or a little cart, and you go up and you just get these pizzas from them, and they're fantastic. They're so good. I don't think it's quite DiGiorno. No, it's probably not as good as DiGiorno. I think you can tell if it's delivery, DiGiorno, or Italian. But they'd be trading in their pizza for DiGiorno if they did. You see the hills and coastline of Italy there. But who do you think it would be that would first master English in their family? It would be this 7-year-old daughter who would master English more quickly. And why? Because she's still in sort of that sweet spot of a younger person who can learn language quicker. So the question then is, are we doing the right thing by focusing on languages in the high school level? Like you're taking French or German, or probably not German anymore. I think they've pretty much kicked that to the side. Latin as well. There's barely any students taking Latin. Mostly students take Spanish, and that's it. We're not even teaching you Farsi or Mandarin. Those are the languages really you should be learning to communicate with Asia and the Middle East. Anyway, shouldn't we be doing this at the elementary level? Well, there are a couple schools in our district who do immersion programs where they'll teach Spanish in an immersion way. So immersion means you're going to be using Spanish all the day long. All day long at school you'll be speaking in Spanish, and that's probably the best way to end up learning it. And at a younger age like that, it would end up sticking. According to learning theory, children's vocabularies increase and their pronunciation will improve if parents are insisting on closer and closer approximations of the correct word before they provide reinforcement. So if you're teaching a young person to read, the more you're pushing them to say words correctly, they're going to have better vocabularies because of that. So oftentimes, I think this is a self-replicating situation. If you have an educated parent or set of parents, they're going to push their younger kids to do the same, to become more educated. Now, obviously, that doesn't happen all the time. I mean, my parents didn't go to college, and they didn't even really read much at all. My mom read some after, I was already in high school. She started reading quite a lot more when she was older, but my dad wasn't a reader. He read the paper. That'd be about it. But there I am reading to my son there at the bottom. And there's a pretty good chance that he's going to end up using some of the things that, I've worked on with him. I think spending the time with your child and sitting there and reading with them is a pretty important thing to do. Like English should, be like the only, language that's, taught, in, school, so that, kids can, communicate, in our society, society. When I was in high school, there were these Valley Girls, and I would tell you about that, but I wouldn't want to gag you with a spoon. But they were all the rage in high school then. Just be glad you're not old like me. Language development. How many words do you think that you know now? Probably close to 80,000 words. That's pretty crazy. I think we said earlier that the average younger person, what was it? Let's see if I can get back to it. Was it 60,000 by the time you're a high school student? By the time you graduate from high school? Let's see, where are we at here? I must have been the last. Presentation that I gave to you. I think it was 60,000. But this is another number that's kind of estimating that, probably close to 80,000. You get about to age 1 and you average about 13 words a day. And I think the slide we showed you in the last video was that you have a couple words an hour. So, somewhere in this vicinity, 60 to 80,000 words between, you know, 13 and 20 or 30 words a day. That's pretty amazing. The human mind is in so many ways is fascinating, but that you can pick up this many words and learn them so well is fascinating. But of course, you're not going to learn things that you're not attending to or spending time at. So imagine if you're pushing yourself to learn new words or read more, or pushing yourself to take tougher classes and challenge your vocabulary level and improve it, how much better that would be. So what made these Super Bowl commercials so funny? You probably remember them. They're the talking baby in the ad for, what was it? The E-Trade. It's the E-Trade baby. The joke is completely language acquisition based. So if you got the joke, you understand language acquisition. It's funny or odd to see a baby talk like a trader or an adult, because they don't do that. They can acquire language pretty quickly, but they don't talk in that way and outsmart other humans typically. Same thing for like the baby on Family Guy, who I think his name's Stewie, who's always speaking in full proper English, in fact a British accent, which probably sounds even smarter. But I like the cartoon there at the bottom. He doesn't really talk yet, but he does do sound bites, and I guess that's good. Let's talk Whorfian. This is a little bit confusing for some students, but it has to do with language and thought. And this a little bit. This will go for a little while here, for a couple minutes here, but stick with me here, because it's this kind of thing that over time has evolved and changed a little bit. And this man to the left there, Benjamin Whorf, believed in the linguistic determination of our words shaping or then restricting our own thinking. And the idea that he was trying to investigate is, do our words shape the way we think, or do we have ideas first and then look for ways to articulate those words? This is kind of a fascinating way of looking at this. His hypothesis, or the Whorfian hypothesis, not that Whorf, but the one above, that language affects thought, and the structure of the language affects cognition. So the structure itself affects cognition. This was his hypothesis, that language changes your thought, that you would need to have a strong vocabulary to have a deep cognitive ability. Interesting. Does language influence our thinking is really what he was trying to get to the bottom of. Whorf's linguistic relativity went this way. Language determines the way we think and not vice versa. So it's a one-way street. Language determines the way we speak, or way we think, sorry. The Hopi tribe has no past tense in their language. So Whorf would say that they rarely think of the past. How can they if they can't conjure up a word for it? Whorf said, our language controls or limits what we can know and what we can think. And Sapir and Whorf, they both worked on this together. We'll see a picture of him in a second. Their hypothesis is also stated that language is not merely a way to express ideas. It also determines the range of ideas we can have. So if there's no word for a certain concept, it's hard for people to be even able to conceive of it. And I think we've already discussed how this probably is not the case, don't you think? We can solve problems and deal with issues, especially in a spatial relationship way, without having vocabulary for it. And animals can do something similar. But if we discover new things, but we don't have a term to call it, in Whorf's idea here, we can't proclaim our findings. Now, this has a rather profound impact if you're looking at trying to determine whether one ethnic group is more intelligent than another. It would be dependent upon their language, wouldn't it? If you used what Whorf is saying here, his linguistic relativity, couldn't you make the case that the Hopi tribe is more simplistic or backward, or they're not quite as cultured if they have no type of language to explain what the past would be? Well, Native American languages, is what he wrote, impose on their speakers a picture of reality that is totally different from ours. So their speakers would simply not be able to understand some of the most basic concepts. Like, would they be able to determine the flow of time? Or an object like a stone falling, or the actions like fall? They didn't have words for those things. So for decades, Worf's theory dazzled both academics and the general public alike. And in his shadow, others made a whole range of imaginative claims about the supposed power of language. These ranged from the assertion that Native American speakers and their languages would instill in their speakers an intuitive understanding of the concept of time as a fourth dimension. Like, that's like amazingly like advanced. Wow. They have it. They're beyond like normal societies. Look, they can think in a way that Einstein, might have been able to appreciate. To the other extent, where some people might say that the nature of the Jewish religion was determined by the tense or system of ancient Hebrew. So this has a cultural impact. Worf's quote on the side is, "We dissect nature along lines laid down by our native language. Language is not simply a reporting device for experience, but for defining framework for it." So the Inuit on the left there, who are in the sled, they've got many ways to say snow because they've got so many types of snow. What about someone in Australia where they don't get snow at all? Would they be less intelligent because they didn't have a word for it? Would they be able to experience it when they went somewhere where it did snow? Pretty interesting. Well, let's look at it here. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis that language determines our experience of reality, and we can see and think only what our languages allow us to see and think. For example, the Inuit, like I mentioned, have many words for snow, and their sophisticated snow vocabulary make it easier for them to communicate and understand each other. Therefore, they experience snow-covered landscapes quite differently from the rest of us. And the cartoon on the left there says, "Did you know the English have over 400 words for no? English have 10 times as many negative words." Interesting. And the person there, the Inuit, is saying, "Did you know that suburban white males have over 100 words for lawn?" Those are both kind of jokes. They're toying with the ideas of Worf. But in the box here are some things that might make some sense to you. Although the Inuit have many different words for snow, it does not show that the language determines reality, but instead suggests that the reality of their world determines their language. Do you see what I'm saying? The reason that the Inuit have so many words for snow is because their environment. They live in snow-covered areas. And in contrast, the reason there are not many words for snow in Australia is that it doesn't snow there very often. So when you're discussing the world and talking about it, and you have this perceptual universe, Worf would think that you wouldn't be able to perceive the world and discuss it if you didn't know it existed. And so therefore you have no way of thinking of it. That's not exactly true, I wouldn't think. Do people that speak more than one language think differently depending on their language at that time? And we have an article on Worf that we may get to either during this chapter or immediately after it, or the road before the end of the semester, before the AP test. So maybe have a little bit more on him if we have some time in class to discuss it as a group. There's a really good New York Times article that I pulled some of this from that goes into more detail on it. But let's talk about language. And those people that are bilingual or trilingual, do they think differently depending on their language at the time? Or if they have the ability to think of things in two languages at once, are they hampered by that? Are they not able to communicate as well? Or can they communicate in ways that someone who has just a single language could not do? The bilingual person is primed in a way that monolinguals are not, to seek out and at times separate the meaning of that the person is trying to convey from the words they are using to do so. The message becomes abstract. It's an abstraction embedded within the words they're setting. It's hard to explain this, but what they're really saying here is that a bilingual person has more opportunities to understand the world around them, that they actually would have better opportunity to understand language in a deeper way. If you look at the brain scans there on the left middle, it says the left hemisphere, right hemisphere of a Spanish native language learner. And then people with English as a second language, they're below. They have more activity when they're in English, meaning it's their second language. So as they're learning and talking and functioning in the second language, they're using some of the first to get to it. And in some ways, they're showing much more complex use of the brain and at a higher level of thought than you would suppose originally. This goes to prove that if you are trying to speak with someone who is an English as second language person and they're struggling to describe what they're saying in English, or it seems to be broken English to you, before, if you're only an English speaking person, obviously, but before I'm saying it as someone who might be, and you're looking at someone who's struggling with English as a second language, before you leap to this generalized idea that they are not quite as intelligent as you are, you might want to put the brakes on that a little bit, because they know 2 languages and you only know 1. I would love to see if the tables were turned and someone was asking you a question in Spanish or Russian or French. How would you respond, and how well would you be able to express yourself? You would probably seem really stupid to them. So, we have to take this with a grain of salt. Just because someone doesn't understand your language as well as you do doesn't mean that they have less of a cognitive ability or less intelligence. In fact, they may have a higher intelligence than you do because they're able to communicate in 2 languages. Looking at Worf's theory, do people that speak more than 1 language think differently? Well, eventually, Worf's theory crash-landed on hard facts and some solid common evidence. That when it transpired that there were never actually any real proof or evidence to support his fantastic theories and claims. It was more like an idea. The reaction was so severely against Worf and his Sapir-Whorfian hypothesis that any attempts to explore the influence of the mother tongue on your own thoughts were relegated to the loony fringes of disrepute, which means that people were less likely to look into language because they felt like, whoa, this is kind of a taboo topic. So after 70 years, some believe it's time to put the trauma of Worf behind us. This was what the New York Times article wrote. And then in the last few years, new research has revealed that when we learn our mother tongue, we do, after all, require certain habits of thought. And those shape our experience in significant and surprising ways. So this is whack. So hang on with me here for a second. We started with Worf and we said he had this new idea or way of looking at the world, that language affects thought and the structure of language itself affects cognition. Okay? And he kind of based that on his ideas. There wasn't a whole lot of proof behind it. And when they really finally started to try to look into this more and prove it and be skeptical of it, they found some holes. And when they found these holes in his thinking, what ended up happening was they had such a severe reaction against what he did that they almost discredit him and his ideas without really thinking more clearly about it. All I'm saying at the end here is that there's some gray area here. In some ways, Worf might have been correct. In other ways, he went too far with it. I think what you can say for sure is that it does affect our ability to think in some ways. It can limit us in some ways. But I think the one thing that I always come back to when I look at this research is the bilingual aspect of it. That a bilingual person's primed in a way that monolinguals are not, to seek out and separate meaning and try to find out how someone is trying to express themselves, and they have to work through that and to get the message and the abstraction out of it. Anyway, almost done here, but Worf's confusing, and I know he is, but He was on the last AP test. I'm sure he'll be on the test again at some point. It's good to be very familiar with him and at least to understand the controversial nature of his claim, but also maybe the fact that the way science works is you're constantly trying to prove or disprove ideas, and it's a good idea to like keep up with that process. And we kind of lost, I think, scientifically, they took their eyes off the ball with Worf some. Do people that speak more than one language think differently depending on their language at the time? Let's look at some other ways to look at this. If the inventory of ready-made words in your language determined which concepts you were able to understand, how would you ever learn anything new? So that's definitely against what Worf was saying. If you have no words for snow and you're Australian, couldn't you, if you moved and went somewhere where there was snow, wouldn't you then say, hey, that's snow, I learned a new word today? That's not hard to do. Roman Jacobson wrote that languages differ essentially in what they must convey and not in what they may convey. That this maxim offers us the key to unlocking the real force of the mother tongue. If different languages influence our minds in different ways, this is not because of what our language allows us to think of, but rather because of what it habitually obliges us to think of, or maybe pushes us in that direction. And I'll remind you again of Pittsburghese here. Yin's guys might have forgotten about that. Did I grow up in a culture in the Pittsburgh area where I was exposed to some ideas, a cultural awareness of things, whether that was listening to 102.5 WDV Rocks, or just the word yins and the concept of what that means, that it was different than the typical you all or you guys or you all or y'all. It's a Pittsburgh thing. So is that meaning that, I have a mindset now growing up there where I spent my formative years, wasn't born in Pittsburgh, but I grew up there, where that's my mindset. Now coming to Houston, I've spent more time in Houston than I lived in Pittsburgh. That's why I consider myself a Houstonian, first and foremost, with a Pittsburgh background. Is where I came from. Do I walk around today down here saying things like 100% or 20, or I'm having a chipped ham sandwich and milk, French fries and ketchup, and that pierogi? You probably don't even know what a pierogi is. It's pretty good. It's like I don't know. I can't explain it to you. It's just good. This black and gold and that are my favorite killers instead of colors. The word stillers instead of steelers. It's just a way that, like, my car needs washed. My grandfather used to always say, and go wash your hands. Yeah, it's a way of like speaking, but it doesn't mean that I haven't been able to adjust. I don't go to get a hoagie when I go to Subway. It's a sub. I call it a sub down here, but in Pittsburgh they call them hoagies. What's another good one? I saw one on there. I know what it is. Watch out, it's slippy. That's what they say when there's ice. They don't say it's slippery. They say it's slippy. It's just a weird thing, isn't it? But I don't continue using those words in a place here in Houston that wouldn't understand it. Now I may have some of that inflection in my voice, and I'm sure that I do, especially when I'm tired or really worn down. Or if I go back to Pittsburgh for a few days, I may find myself, catching up on my Pittsburghese. I'll come back and realize that, oh yeah, not everybody talks like that again. Here's slang through 3 decades, how people speak. And at the top, my bad, cha-ching, shut up, OMG, sweet. Those are examples of these. So as things have changed in the 1980s, 1990s, and 2000s, and you kind of wonder what people are going to say next. You never know what people are going to say on a daily basis. Anyway, that's part 2 of language and thought, how language and hopefully you have a better understanding or a deeper way of considering this. we'll look some more at how it is kind of an output language and thought is, and how that functions with our behavior in the next section of notes, which is a little bit shorter than these two. So until next time, don't forget to be awesome.